G'day humans, welcome to what we're calling Josh versus the News, a new name for not very new thing, where we basically go over some of the interesting stories that I've found most scintillating this week and give you our takes, some of the stories that you've asked for me to comment on, some of the things that are afloat in your boat that perhaps the rest of the mainstream media is not addressing in quite as lucid or jocular a way as yours truly may be able to. Streaming live on Substack and on YouTube. If you want to jump in and leave any questions or comments there, then we'll get to them. I got to tell you, I don't want to bury the lead, but allow me to. We have a story hot off the presses today. It's not that hot; it's a few days old, but you probably haven't heard about it anyway. This is the story of insurance premiums. It doesn't sound very sexy, does it? Insurance premiums to begin with. Are we good, Jono? Jono's just running in here. He looks like he's scurrying around fixing things, fixing technical issues. So you might think to yourself, well, hang on, old Zepsy, car insurance premiums. This is not the way that we like to start our beloved segment, Josh versus the News, the time-honored segment that we've come to know and love, loathe these many 90 seconds that you've been doing it. But bear with me, because this has to do with a scandal that my friend Ben Fordham broke on Australia. He's the biggest radio presenter, radio host, radio grand poobah in the history of the universe in Sydney. So Ben got onto this story where it turned out that two of the big car insurance companies in Australia, when you're applying for your car insurance, you can either select that you're male or female, but now they've added non-binary as well when calculating your car insurance. Well, what do you think happens to the price of the car insurance when you select non-binary? I'm going to leave that little cliffhanger until the end of the show as more and more people join us live. Corruption may be the theme of today's show, because I just can't get my head around what's going on in the Trump administration. The lawlessness, the self-dealing, it's just become, it feels like it's escalating somewhat. Piece of evidence number one, evidence to the court, submitted to the court, number one, Melania Trump documentary from Amazon MGM Studios sets release date. Now, I know you've been waiting, as I have, as all good people have around this planet of ours, with bated breath for the Melania Trump behind-the-scenes look at this most scintillating and fascinating and articulate, eloquent of first ladies. She's enigmatic. I'll grant her that. She has a certain mystique. That's what happens when you don't do your job as a first lady and never do anything and don't go out there and don't talk about anything and are never seen and hate your husband. Perhaps, allegedly. Maybe she loves him. I don't know. Don't seem to spend a lot of time together. But anyway, Melania, the most interesting, uninteresting person in the world, has signed a deal with Amazon. Now, far be it from me, I should tell you, it's a $40 million deal. You know, the last time the subject of a documentary feature, who also happened to be the producer of that documentary feature, got paid $40 million for the rights to a movie? Never. I think the answer to that one, ding, 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 ding. I'll take never for 100. Thanks, Alex. So a huge amount of money that Amazon is paying to Melania. And of course, this is people who say this is corruption. It's Melania's money. It's not Donald's money. It's not going to the White House. I'm sure that Jeff Bezos would be doing this deal with Melania even if she had nothing to do with Donald Trump, even if he wasn't trying to curry favor with the President of the United States, wielding the corrupt power of his office. So it's a staggering payday for a documentary. She's inked this deal, and Jeff Bezos, of course, made a point of making the trek to Washington, D.C. to attend Donald Trump's inauguration, standing there with a bunch of other spineless Silicon Valley boobs I guess thinking that they could get on the right side of a president who was obviously going to be interested in sycophancy as much as competence. And so so Jeff Bezos goes, "We've got this great idea. We're gonna pay $40 million in bribes. I mean, in production fees to the first lady, and we're gonna make her a star. We made her look. It's gonna show behind the scenes unprecedented access to the first 20 days leading up to the presidential inauguration of this year through the eyes of the first lady-elect herself." That's a direct quote. The director of the Melania documentary, which I can hear you all say as you're on the edge of your seats, grabbing your popcorn, you're saying, well, come on, when can I see this gem of cinema? January 30, 2026, it'll drop. No, it won't drop yet. Amazon is releasing it in theaters. It gets a theatrical release because Melania screams movie star to me. Movie star. So the director of this film is Brett Ratner. Don't know if you know the name Brett Ratner. Brett was a celebrated filmmaker. He made Rush Hour and other such franchises. He was a good director. Is a good director. I say was because during the Me Too movement, the Los Angeles Times, rather, not the New York Times, in 2017 revealed a string of alleged sexual misconduct by 6 women, and Ratner hasn't worked on a major Hollywood production since. But luckily for him, old Jeffy Bezos and Donnie Trump, they were like, come back into the fold, you accused rapist, and alleged, and maybe not rapist. Maybe just serial sexual abuser, allegedly. So Brett's back and he's directing Melania. So you got this trio. You got the Trumps, you got Jeff Bezos, and you got Brett Ratner, and they're all making a lot of money. Well, no, correction. The Trumps are making a lot of money. Brett Ratner's making a lot of money. Jeff Bezos is losing a lot of money, but he's gaining something else entirely from paying $40 million to the first family. I don't know what that could be, but maybe Jeff has a shrewder idea than I do about what $40 million being paid to the first couple gets you. He's probably more across this than me. In other news today, and by the way, I'll be keeping an eye on the comments, of course, as they come in on YouTube and on Substack. So chat to me, talk to me about your thoughts about these things, and also ask questions, because we'll be answering live questions as well. By the way, if you're hearing this on the podcast feed, I mentioned that this is something that we've been sort of doing a little bit more of. Many of these things, if you're on the free feed, you won't hear, and you won't even know exist. Because sometimes when it's a regular episode of Uncomfortable Conversations, we'll always drop a paywalled half version of any premium episode so that free subscribers can at least hear half of it. They know roughly what they're getting. If they want to subscribe and hear the rest of it, they can. If not, they don't. There'll always be one free episode a week, but that's what we do with the premium paywalled episodes. Well, now, as we're doing more and more stuff on Substack, more live video and so on, you'll be able. You sometimes won't even know what you're missing. So we're not going to just inundate the free feed with a whole bunch of preview episodes of things that you can't listen to all of. We're giving you this one completely free, and then you'll be able to assess whether or not this kind of quality content, ladies and gentlemen, is worth subscribing for, so that you can unlock the entire feed, either on your podcast app or preferably over there on Substack, where you can catch us live. So Denmark is cancelling the post office. Have you heard about this? I thought this was interesting. There are going to be no Christmas card deliveries this year in Denmark. It's the first country in the world to end letter collection. Others will surely follow. They basically say they're opening it up to the private sector. If you really want to send something, you can send something. It's not necessary anymore to have a universal, publicly funded thing because of the sheer decline in the number of letters and cards that are going around. In the past 25 years, the volume of letters has declined by 90% in Denmark. Last year alone, it fell another 30%, which was the result of a new law that Denmark had introduced, which put an end to the requirement that postal companies make service accessible to everyone at an affordable price. Denmark had this policy that a lot of countries do, which is like, it should be the same price regardless of where you are. You're in the middle of nowhere. You don't have to pay any more for a stamp to anywhere in the country than anybody else does. Well, they got rid of that last year. So all of a sudden, 1/3 fewer postal packages. And they scrapped the Postal Service's exemption from VAT, from value-added tax. So postage shot up as well, and that basically sealed the fate of the letter in Denmark. Now, nobody's sending anything. So The Economist has a lovely profile on a gentleman named Peter Kurelt Klitgaard. Of course, his name is Peter Kurelt Klitgaard. I don't think anyone in Denmark is called anything other than Peter Kurelt Klitgaard. It can get very confusing at Christmas parties. So Peter Kurelt Klitgaard moved from Frederiksberg in Copenhagen, moved to Frederiksberg 17 years ago, and they had 5 or 6 post boxes within a few minutes walking distance. Today, there's none. PostNord, the state-owned mail service, has been progressively removing them, and on the 30th day of this month, 2 days before the new year, they will end the collection and delivery of letters entirely. So there you go. I would say that letters are redundant because we now have email, but email is now second only to maybe the swamp of TikTok as just a horrifying place to go. My inbox is a nightmare, a sheer nightmare. And frankly, I'd rather a return to the letter. I sometimes in my wilder moments think to myself, imagine the sense of liberation if you just didn't have email. I met a person like this. I met someone who I said, what's your email? They were like, I do not have email. I was like, what are you talking about? They were like, I don't have email. I was like, how can you not have email? They were like, I cannot have email. I am an individual human being. I'm allowed to not have email. I don't have email. Imagine not having email. If people are close to you and they want to get in touch with you, they text you or call you. And if people aren't close with you, if it's like bills and stuff, they send you things. This is why I want to maintain the Postal Service. Let's go back to the Postal Service. Let's have, I want to send you a thank you note. I can either text you, thanks for dinner last night, it was lovely. Or if, I don't know you so well, and it was just an invitation to some kind of formal event, I can write a nice little handwritten note. I can send it through the conventional mail. So once again, Denmark is showing us the way of the future, and the future stinks. I'll tell you, it stinks to high heaven. Stupid Danes with their free everything. And now they don't even have a postal service. They're probably giving free transgender operations to illegal migrants at the same time as they're ripping letters out of the hands of good white Aryan Danes. See what's happened to this country? I'm going to give Tucker Carlson a run for his money one of these days, I'll tell you what, with talk like this. So to the more important issues of the week, as I was talking about the theme of today's show being corruption and self-dealing and illegality in the Trump administration. Pete Hegseth. Should we talk about this guy? A lot of hand-wringing about whether or not he and the Trump administration have broken international law with this killing of shipwrecked, I don't want to say shipwrecked, that makes it sound like they were in an 18th century wooden ship that ran afoul of some storm and a giant squid got a hold of the ship and dashed them against the Rock of Gibraltar. That's not what happened. What happened was the American Defense Forces, they've been going around the Venezuelan waters, just blowing shit out of the water, and on one occasion at least, on the 2nd of September, there was a boat in the Caribbean, which the American army figured might be drug cartels. We don't know how they know or if they know, but they're like, looks fishy, blow them up. So they blow up the boat, and then there are a couple of survivors of the non-shipwreck, non-giant squid-related maritime incident. And so the survivors are there splashing about in the water, presumably yelling, "Help, help," maybe in Spanish. And they're saying, then the U.S. Army is like, well, what do we do about these two guys who are in the water after we just blew up their boat and killed all of their friends and colleagues? And the U.S. Army goes, well, we should just assassinate, just kill them, just murder them, even while they're in need and pose no threat. And so everyone's going, well, clearly you can't do that. Even if you're at war, once you've taken care of the issue that you wanted to take care of, which is the fact that there's this boat that you claim is carrying drugs, which you claim because of the war on drugs, you are at a war with, and therefore you can just blow it out of the water. I mean, already morally and legally fishy, right? Just shooting a boat out of the water with no clear chain of reasoning or approval or logic beyond the whims of American officials. But then to go the extra step and to blow the two people out of the water when they pose no immediate threat to anybody, that is now saying that this is clearly a war crime. You can't do that. It's a war crime, people are saying. And so apparently there was reporting, I believe it was the Washington Post, that said that Pete Hegseth had directly ordered this second strike, saying, we'll just clear them out. And reminder, the Secretary of Defense in the United States, Pete Hegseth, is a Fox News weekend television host who was promoted to be the head of the Defense Department. Now, I used to be a weekend breakfast television host. And let me tell you, in the hierarchy of broadcasting, the weekend, look, the breakfast slot's a big slot. Okay, that's great. Lots of people watch television in the morning, more than they watch it at, 3 a.m. or even 2 p.m. But being the weekend breakfast host, it's not the most illustrious of all gigs, but he looked the part. Trump saw him on Fox News, liked the cut of his jib. He'd served, he'd done his time. He clearly pumped iron. He was out of central casting. He didn't like fat generals, as we've heard, or fat anyone in the military. And so now he's the defense secretary. And so I say all of this not to demean the man, the hard-working man, God bless Mr. Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth, but simply to say that maybe his grasp of international law is not his number one concern. Maybe shooting from the hip is more his vibe than abiding by these persnickety rules of law. So that was the claim that he had said that we're going to do the second strike, we're going to kill these guys in the water. And now what they're saying is, no, that's not true. They're saying it wasn't Hegseth. It was this bloke called Admiral Brady who they're throwing under the bus. I mean, hey, they're only throwing him under the bus if it was his idea. If it was Hegseth's idea, then they're throwing him under the bus. And he ordered the second strike, Admiral Brady, to fulfill a directive by Mr. Hegseth to kill everyone. So what the Trump administration is saying is, we didn't commit a war crime because what the defense secretary said was kill everyone. He didn't specifically say that if the first strike doesn't kill everyone, go back for a second bite of the cherry, a second crunch on the apple, if you will. So the question now is, did Hegseth specifically order the execution of shipwrecked sailors, which was clear violation of the laws of war? On Sunday night, President Trump says that Hegseth, his defense secretary, denies ordering the second strike to kill two people who were wounded but still alive after the first strike. Trump said, and I quote, Pete said he did not order the death of those two men. Now, this is in the context of him already saying that he wanted to kill everyone. So he said kill everyone, but he didn't order the death of those two men. I'm no logician, ladies and gentlemen, but I think that when you say kill everyone, aren't the two men included in everyone? I don't remember my permutations and combinations, but I think in the set that is everyone, there is a subset, which is the two men who were floating helplessly in the Caribbean. Nonetheless, Trump also wanted to distance himself from this follow-up strike, saying that he, President Trump, quote, wouldn't have wanted that, not a second strike, although he said the first one was fine. So there's this broad policy that the US has at the moment of using lethal force against people suspected of smuggling drugs. There's no way to be sure of it. There's no court involved, obviously. It's not like there's any due process. So starting with that attack on September the 2nd, the Trump administration says, this is what they say, admit to, they've carried out 21 similar strikes in the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific Ocean, killing a total of 83 people, according to the United States. The whole... Oh, and the last note here before I editorialize. So Hegseth said that the original reporting, which said that he had given a specific command to kill those two people, not merely the ambiguous one to kill everyone and burn it all down. He said that reporting was fabricated and inflammatory. He wrote on social media, quote, "As we've said from the beginning and in every statement, these highly effective strikes are specifically intended to be lethal kinetic strikes." That's what he said on social media. Pete, I'm not sure you're doing yourself any favors here. If you're trying not to get hauled before an international war crimes tribunal after you retire, I don't think you should say, "Hey, I didn't order the killing of these two unarmed, helpless, waterlogged individuals. I just wanted lethal kinetic strikes." Nonetheless, I do find the whole media fixation at the moment on the specific question of the two individuals in the water and the second strike a little, I don't know, persnickety, like kind of distracted, strange, arcane, bureaucratic. It's like in the context of an administration which is proudly admitting to killing 83 people who they don't know who they were in 21 bombing runs. Does it really matter, like, what the letter of international law says? I mean, and this is an honest question. Like, I'm still wrestling with this because I am a rules guy. Like, I do think you should have rules of law, of war, and I think it's useful to stay within those rules. But when you're so flagrantly flouting the spirit of probity and of what the proper conduct between nations is, just because you don't like the authoritarian leader in another country, and you're worried that maybe a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the massive problem that you've created for yourself with drugs, a problem that extends from opioids, the drug industry in America, the overprescription of pharmaceuticals by American doctors, the rapacious appetite for cocaine by American consumers, high-flying Americans and Hollywood Americans and Silicon Valley Americans, the implication of Mexican cartels, the border crisis, so many different ways. But you identify this one aspect of the whole affair, which is these specific boats that just happen to be coming from a particular country that you have a beef with, ignoring all of the other sources of drugs into America, except for the ones from this country. I mean, it almost reminds me of the selective prosecution of the Trump Justice Department of its enemies, where, instead of behaving like a Justice Department should, which is you follow the evidence until it leads to an individual, and then if the evidence suffices, you indict that individual and you charge them. You start with the individual and you work backwards and try to figure out whether or not there's anything that they might have done which they could be guilty of, as in the case of the charges against James Comey that were thrown out, and Letitia James, is that her name? Anyway, multiple individuals who clearly the President of the United States has instructed the Justice Department to find any pretext for, and in fact the head of the person who was authorized to do so in the Trump administration, said, I'm not going to do this, and actually resigned. And then Trump had to find some lackey junior lawyer who had never done anything like this to bring the charge. And the mistakes that she made in the charging process of James Comey is why those charges have been thrown out. And as an aside, some conservative people or Republicans will say, yeah, but what about the selective prosecution of Donald Trump under the Biden administration? To which I would say, it is clear that certain prosecutors under the Biden administration, but mostly not actually in the Biden administration itself, because we were talking about the New York Justice Department, we were talking about state cases and so on, were clearly looking for dirt on Donald Trump and brought a bunch of cases against Trump because he was Donald Trump. But a couple of things. One, that didn't come from the top down. There's no evidence that the President of the United States was saying, go and find dirt on my rival. Two, it was absolutely abundantly clear that Donald Trump had behaved in illegal, or certainly possibly illegal ways, both in terms of his conduct on January 6th, encouraging the riots, in terms of his strong-arming the Georgia Secretary of State to find him enough votes to get him over the line in Georgia and basically rig the election results, in numerous ways. The paying of hush money to the prostitute was the least of the concerns. So selective prosecutions do happen. Under the prosecutions against Donald Trump were a flagrantly, proudly potentially guilty man being who is also notoriously slippery and adept at not stepping over the line to make an obvious illegal crime easily prosecutable, being pursued by prosecutors from various different jurisdictions who felt that the sum totality of his conduct was such that he deserved some level of scrutiny, much less scrutiny than an ordinary civilian would get, but nonetheless some scrutiny. That's not the same as the President of the United States feeling aggrieved towards James Comey, a man who seems to have done nothing wrong, and then instructing his Justice Department to take action and to charge him with something where, even if you know that you're going to win the trial at the end of the day, to have the government taking you to court and trying to prosecute you is enormously draining emotionally and financially. So you know that it's going to derange the person's life deleteriously, regardless of whether or not they win at the end of the day. So to have a president hunt down his enemies, who are now just civilians, who are people who prosecutors don't think committed any crime, on a bunch of trumped-up charges, is different from the kind of spray of prosecutions that we saw directed at the obviously potential criminality of President Trump last time. So just having made that, I'm drawing a slightly long bow here in saying that Trump's desire to start with the conclusion and then work backwards, I want to punish Comey, therefore let's find a rationale by which we might do it, is not that dissimilar to what's going on with these Venezuelan boats being blown out of the sea. I hate Maduro, the leader of Venezuela. He's a nasty guy. I want to punish Venezuela. Therefore, let's work backwards and isolate the particular pressure point that we can put on Venezuela in the absence of any kind of overall strategy or impartiality, and let's blow these boats out of the water with no due process. So in that whole context of the flouting of international law, let alone whether you want to get into foreign policy on the bombing of the Iranian nuclear site, support for Israel, whatever other thing it might be, the pressuring of European allies, the disintegration of NATO, of the NATO security, the plausibility of the NATO security guarantee. In the context of all of that, it just seems very, very buttoned up for journalists and legal scholars to be like, well, actually, those two people who are in the water, that's the war crime. Yeah, maybe. I mean, do we care? I don't really necessarily care. Why does it matter? If they just used a bigger bomb on the boat the first time, then the two people wouldn't have survived in the first place, and then it wouldn't have been a war crime. You know what I mean? You could machine gun them from a helicopter and kill everyone on board, and it'd be fine. But if one of them jumps into the sea first, and then you blow them up, then it's suddenly a war crime. The point is to follow the spirit of the law when it comes to upholding international law and norms. The point is not to steamroll over everything and then for your opponents to think that they've done a real gotcha when they find out that one thing that you did was in technical breach of a rule. Thanks for all your questions and comments coming in on YouTube and Substack. Raymond says, was it wrong to prosecute Al Capone for tax evasion, or is that not equivalent? Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the classic archetypal case, isn't it? No, it obviously wasn't wrong to prosecute Al Capone for tax evasion because they knew that Al Capone was guilty of a whole bunch of other stuff, and if he happened to also be a tax evader, that was good enough to do. On the Melania Trump documentary, BNTHB says, I don't blame her. She seems smart to just stay quiet. I mean, you could look at it that way, but she was being quiet a long time before she had reason to be smart. Maliki says, maybe she loves him. Ha! Yes, possible. And another person says, Trump corrupt, more breaking news at 11. Thank you very much. On the Danish Postal Service going out of business, not out of business, being decommissioned by the state because nobody's sending letters. Evan says, I think this makes me sad. Wendell Berry doesn't own or use a computer. Okay, well, that's great. Greg says, no more Danish greeting cards. That's true. And another person says on the whole Pete Hegseth thing, it's sad that this news will be forgotten in a few weeks' time and we will all move on. And Jim says, Nuremberg? ? Yeah, has anyone seen that movie? Have you seen the Nuremberg movie? You know, Russell Crowe is playing... it's not Goebbels, is it? Is it Goering? I think it's Goering. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up on Goering. Too many Nazi G names for me. And I don't know if you've seen the photos of Russell Crowe on this, but man, he looks like Goering. Do I know what Goering looked like? Not at all. Not a clue. But he looks like what I imagine Goering would have looked like. For a start, it's extraordinary because the man's put on 450 pounds. I mean, if you like your Russell Crowe, you get extra Russell Crowe, you get extra serving of Russell Crowe here. Because clearly Goering was a portly gentleman. And it looks fabulous. It's about the Nuremberg trials and the attempt to pin down Goering. I'm speaking as if I have seen this film or know anything about it. I saw the trailer. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But yes, the person is saying, could you use that as a precedent to prosecute war crimes? It's possible. The only problem is in practice, in the real world, only victors prosecute the defeated. So until Xi Jinping is marching his CCP tanks down Pennsylvania Avenue, I don't think we're going to see Pete Hegseth or anyone in the Trump administration being prosecuted in an international court. And Isaac says, Josh, would you ever consider a live tour around Australia akin to what Sam Harris is currently up to in America? Thank you, Isaac. It's on the cards as a possible thing in the future. I think we want to build the local audience bigger. So tell your friends about the show and the Substack and the podcast because the more people we have here. I mean, I've done a live tour with Jane Goodall. I've done one with Jonathan Haidt. I've done one with Douglas Murray. I've done one with David Walliams from Little Britain. I've done one with Coleman Hughes. This has happened, but it's always me in conversation with someone. I'm not sure about it just being me waffling on like this. How much would you pay? What would you pay? Maybe $1.50, $1.75. I don't know if I can make the economics work on this. Because see, when you subscribe to this thing on the Substack or on Apple or wherever you're getting it, what is it, $5.99 a month? And how many of these things do I do? Feels like doing one every damn day. So you amortize that. It's $0.25 per episode. Great value. The other thing I wanted to talk about today, before we get to the extraordinary news about what non-binary Australians are being charged for car insurance, is the other big story. If you missed the top of the show, this is what we're getting to at the end of the show. This is the payoff. I like to end with a big bang on Josh versus the news. I always do it. This is the first episode. I always do it every episode. So stay tuned for that. But before we get to non-binary car insurance premiums, I want to spare a thought for the National Guard's officers who were shot this week by an Afghan gentleman who was in the U.S. As a refugee, basically, from seeking asylum because he had assisted the U.S. and its allies in the wake of the Afghan campaign. And these National Guard members from West Virginia were near the White House on Wednesday afternoon of last week. And he shot them both, and one of them subsequently died. What's first thing to say, obviously, terribly tragic. Second thing to say, we don't really know why this guy did it. He was 5 years old when 9/11 happened. He was born and raised in Afghanistan. He ended up being of some assistance to, affiliated with the groups that were assisting the anti-Taliban pro-American forces. His life is therefore in danger in Afghanistan. The context is that we in the West had been woefully sort of slow about honoring our promises to Afghan collaborators who were working with us to try to get rid of the Taliban. And we'd made all sorts of promises on the ground about how, if you don't worry, the Taliban's never coming back into power. Even if they did, you would have asylum. You work with us, because, we went into this place not being able to speak their language. We needed thousands and thousands and thousands of translators and helpers and people who knew the lay of the land. And so people collaborated. People wanted who were anti-Taliban, pro-Western Afghans. They helped. And we promised them that we'd keep them safe. And over the course of the subsequent years, very, very few of those promises were kept. So under the Biden administration, they did create this program called Operation Allied Freedom or something like that, which was a way to slowly, with a lot of thorough vetting, welcome some people from Afghanistan into the United States and grant their asylum claims. It was still an incredibly bureaucratic process. As someone myself who has dealt with the U.S. immigration system multiple times, I lived there for a dozen years and eventually got a green card. It's an enormously frustrating and slow and bureaucratic process. It's like your life is being run by the DMV. Nonetheless, this guy got cleared, and unfortunately, he was a father of 5. He was in his 20s, and for some reason, he snapped. So, firstly, why were there National Guards people in Washington, D.C.? Because Donald Trump sent them there. They weren't there before. Why did he send them there? They weren't necessary. If he'd really wanted to do something about crime in Washington, D.C., which was not out of control by historical proportions, but still bad enough that you want to do something about, there were plenty of ways in which the federal government could have collaborated with local authorities and local law enforcement, asking them, what support do you need? What are the failings? What are the resources that you don't have that you want? Can we assist? Instead of driving tanks into the streets and doing this big show of force with National Guards officers stationed all over the place. So that's the first point. They were in harm's way because of essentially a photo op that President Trump wanted to pull off. Secondly, and vastly most importantly, this is now being used as a pretext by the United States government for one of the most sweeping changes to asylum processing and immigration policy that we've seen in generations, certainly decades, and certainly in the Trump administration yet. Because they're using this as a pretext to not only summarily cancel, they're saying pause, but, when is that pause going to be lifted? Certainly not as long as Donald Trump or his successor are in the White House. Pause all asylum claims. So people who've been going through years and years of meetings, interviews, submissions of everything, going back to, find document 74B that was issued by some Afghan courthouse 15 years ago that they need to dredge up because some bureaucrat in the Department of Immigration in the United States and Homeland Security needs to see something, and then it doesn't quite match because the code on it has to be done. The amount of going back and forth is mind-boggling, and people who've been locked in this for a long time, who are enthusiastically and proudly committed to America and want nothing more than to become American citizens and have chosen to be in America and whose lives may be endangered by going back and living under the Taliban in Afghanistan are now having their cases frozen, in some cases reversed, and in some cases, and this is where it gets legally questionable, Donald Trump is also saying that even the cases that have already been decided where green cards have been issued, they're going to be reviewed. So they want to suspend the green cards of people like that. Once you've got it, you're supposed to have it. This is a bit like his attempt to denaturalize American citizens. A certain subset of American citizens, the Trump administration says, should be able to be stripped of their US citizenship, which is ridiculous. Citizens own the country. The president doesn't own the country. The citizens are the country. Similarly, once you've got your green card, you pretty much, unless you commit a crime, that should be that. These are people who have committed no crime, who just happen to share the nationality of a 20-something who did commit a crime. Now, I'm not going as far as some on the left will say, which is, why are they attacking, why are they cracking down on people from Afghanistan? This person could have been from anywhere. He happened to be from Afghanistan, but hey, if he'd come from, Denmark, would they be getting rid of all the Danish Americans? How can we possibly say what motivates this person? That's evasive, and it doesn't give due credence to the concerns that people on the right of the immigration debate have about the different complexion of people from different parts of the world. If you come from a place where fundamentalist Islam and jihadism and anti-Western sentiment are widespread, then it is legitimate for authorities who are concerned about those things to scrutinize you more than they would someone from Denmark. Similarly, if there was a white neo-Nazi supremacist who committed a terrorist attack, as happened in Christchurch in New Zealand, for example, then it's appropriate for the authorities to redouble their focus on the phenomenon of white supremacist neo-Nazism online and in their community. You are entitled to, I suppose, profile the communities that are likeliest to cause harm. But that's different from taking a single example and then collectively punishing everybody who comes from that country or that ethnicity, even if they've already had the proper vetting done. It's never going to be conceivable that you're going to eliminate every single crazy person from any cohort of people in a large, vibrant, thriving, multi-ethnic democracy like the United States. So this is really being used as a cynical way of enacting things that Stephen Miller, who's the effectively white nationalist immigration czar of the United States, want to achieve anyway, which is a return to a majority white Christian America. He tweeted, actually, before I read the tweet, let me read you something else, which is fascinating on this, because not only is it unjust and bad for the United States and bad for the Afghans who are trying to stay in the United States and support the United States and enrich the United States, to suddenly introduce sweeping reforms of the immigration system and freezing and potentially reversing decisions that have already been made. But it's also terrible for the American military and for future American military campaigns. And this is a point that was made by the Wall Street Journal editorial board. The Wall Street Journal, if you don't know, is extremely conservative, and it went from being an anti-Trump traditional conservative newspaper pre-Trump into carrying water for Trump. And there was a lot of controversy at the Wall Street Journal amongst staff, amongst journalists about this pivot, I suppose. It's owned by Rupert Murdoch. It does excellent journalism, excellent feature reporting. It has great reporters and great journalists. It's one of the best newspapers in the world on its news side. But the op-ed page, the opinions, the editorials, are notoriously right-wing and, of late, meaning the past 10 years, overly sympathetic to the Trump administration's version of affairs, which is why this editorial is so interesting. It's entitled "The Ambush on the National Guard, the alleged shooting by an Afghan partner," quote-unquote, partner meaning a partner of the United States mission in Afghanistan, "should not condemn all who assisted the US and now live here. They basically explain what happened in the mass shooting near the White House. They note that officials are calling it a terrorist attack. And then they note, but the CIA says that the alleged shooter was part of a CIA-backed Afghan partner force in Kandahar province, one of the most dangerous places during the war. He was a Taliban target. He was on our side. He and his family were candidates for evacuation after the chaotic US retreat from Afghanistan in 2021. So you can call him a terrorist, but if anything, he was one of our terrorists who was, committing attacks, sometimes brutal and ruthless and, human rights abusive attacks, allegedly, on people who were sympathetic to the Taliban. So listen to what the Wall Street Journal editorial has to say, because I think it's insightful in its unusual opposition to the Trump administration on this. Even careful vetting is imperfect, the editorial board writes. And Rahman Allah Lakanwal, the suspect, may have become radicalized in the US. This has been known to happen even with the children of refugees who grow up in America. The Wall Street Journal editorial goes on to say, some will say this means the US should never admit such refugees, but the alternative is abandoning allies who assist Americans in war to the retribution of our enemies. The fate of Afghans, men and women, who worked with the US has often been brutal. You can be sure Americans will fight overseas again, and our troops will need allies on the ground to succeed. How many will assist us if they believe there'll be no exit for them if the US leaves with the enemy triumphant? The Wall Street Journal editorial goes on to say, and by the way, the editorial, this is not just an opinion writer who has submitted something who gets published in their pages. This is the official voice of the Wall Street Journal, one of the most august pro-Trump publications. It says the Trump administration said it's paused processing immigration applications from Afghanistan, and Mr. Trump said the attack justifies his mass deportation policy. But it would be a shame if this single act of betrayal became the excuse for deporting all Afghan refugees in the United States, which it seems to be. Tens of thousands, write the Wall Street Journal, are building new lives here in peace and are contributing to their communities. They shouldn't be blamed for the violent act of one man. Collective punishment of all Afghans in the US won't make America safer, and it might embitter more against the United States. So that's the normally pro-Trump Wall Street Journal making a point that I think is a good one, which is this is not only inhumane to deport all Afghan refugees in an act of collective punishment, even if you concede that they are at greater risk of being perpetrators of jihadism as a collective group, as a nation. These ones have been vetted. Yes, focus on them more, be mindful of them more. You don't have to play left-wing games about how, this person, there's no reason to believe why someone who comes from a place that's full of jihadism might be more likely to be a jihadist than someone who doesn't. You don't even have to go there with that kind of identitarian wokeness. You can just say, yes, it's dangerous to bring people in from Afghanistan, so look at them carefully, vet them carefully. No vetting's going to be 100%, and we'll live with the consequences, of which this is just one tragedy. So not only, the Wall Street Journal is saying, is this a moral question, not only is it bad for American multiculturalism, but it's bad for the American military, because in the future, no one's going to cooperate with you if they think that you're going to blame them for the acts of their own enemies in their country. Which brings me to Stephen Miller's retort to this, which is on Twitter, has millions of views, and many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of likes. He tweets this Wall Street Journal editorial, and he writes, "This is the great lie of mass migration. You're not just importing individuals, you are importing societies. No magic transformation occurs when failed states cross borders. At scale, migrants and their descendants recreate the conditions and terrors of their broken homelands." That is about as racist and white nationalist a position as I've ever seen any American official publish in public. You're not just importing individuals, you're importing societies. I mean, quite apart from anything else, do you know the numbers of Afghans we're talking about here in comparison to 340 million? I mean, how many would you need? You know, you might need 5% of the population to have a material impact on the complexion of the rest of the society. Like the idea that their broken homelands are going to be brought in at such scale that they're going to demolish the robust democracy of the United States. We're talking about fractions of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage point of the population. Now, admittedly, if they were all terrorists, that would be bad, because then you would have more terrorist attacks. But these people have been vetted and vetted and vetted and vetted and vetted. So the idea that you're essentially bringing failed states from abroad to reconstitute themselves in the United States and to recreate the conditions and the terrors of their broken homelands is just not true when you look at the kinds of people who are desperate to get away from the Taliban, who put their necks on the line to oppose the Taliban when they were given the opportunity to do so during the campaign against the Taliban, who were promised that they were going to be protected from the Taliban, and who want to come to the United States precisely not to be around the Taliban, precisely because the Taliban will kill or torture them if they go home. It's this very strange, like almost, I like the idea of right-wing wokeism. It's like a kind of a right wokeness, because Stephen Miller is basically doing what Ibram X. Kendi and like very, very far left identitarian culture warriors of the social justice kind do, which is conceive of groups as being inescapably defined by their race or their ethnicity or their religion. Like, it's like, instead of turning the volume down on our differences and turning the volume up on our universal humanity, both of these groups, the far-right populists and the far-left wokesters, are enthusiastic about trying to define everybody according to a checkbox of identity characteristics, so that, you know, the person who's talking about how racism in America is inescapable, you know, that it's an irretrievably white supremacist power structure, and that a person's race, you know, a black person in America, their black body will always be crushed by the systemic forces around them in which all white people are complicit. Like, that kind of talk is the exact mirror image, the exact flip side of the same coin of what Stephen Miller is saying, which is that Afghanistan, the Afghan people, are this unconstituted whole. They are just a gigantic blob of sameness, and their intrinsic Afghanness, their intrinsic affiliation with a broken homeland renders all of them permanently suspect, in the same way that all white people are permanently suspect to the race hucksters of the far left, in the same way that all men are permanently suspect to the extremists of the, you know, men should all die supra-feminist movement, in the same way that, you know, Jews are held liable for the actions of Israel by wild-eyed pro-Palestinian protesters, in the same way that all Arabs are held liable for the conduct of Hamas by ultra-Zionist religious fanatics. This is the scourge of our age, this kind of tribalism of thinking not in differentiated individual human beings who have their own agency and who are capable of striving for better lives, but of all of us as belonging to some clan or other, tethered to it in perpetuity, unable to escape it, unable to build new lives in the gleaming city on the hill that the United States is supposed to be. I mean, Stephen Miller, what a corrupt little joke of a man. I mean, you know, someone take him off the south end of Manhattan in a little boat and let him read the inscription on the Statue of Liberty about bringing me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, bring these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed, to me. I didn't even know that I still remembered that. But it's a goodie. And specifically says, you know, the huddled masses. Exactly what Stephen Miller is saying we shouldn't bring in. Because who wants to turn America into into the same kind of broken homeland? Well, the statue which is most visible to all new migrants arriving by boat, that's who. That's who disagrees with you, Stephen Miller. So that's that. So across the actions of the Defense Department in blowing people out of the water in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, and what's going on with the changes to immigration and asylum as a result of the tragedy in Washington, D.C. Add to that the $40 million that Jeff Bezos is paying to the Trumps for this Amazon documentary. And it's definitely not a normal administration. If you wanted change, America, you've got some change. So, as we wrap up Josh versus the news, I'm coming to the big story. The big story of the week. Two major insurance companies in Australia were revealed this week by my friend Ben Fordham on 2GB Radio. He's the biggest, as I said, he is the biggest, most famous and most successful radio broadcaster in the world in Sydney. And Ben revealed that two of the big car insurers have added the non-binary option to when you're applying for your car insurance. Now, as you know, insurance companies, they use all the actuarial data to figure out whether or not your age or your gender, your sex rather, gives you any higher or lower premium. And a 22-year-old male called in to, contacted Ben's show. And he was shopping around for car insurance. And as a 22-year-old male, he gets the most expensive car insurance in the world because he's 22, and 22-year-olds have a lot of accidents, and he's male, and males have a lot of accidents. Male 22-year-old, you end up having to mortgage your house. You end up having to sell grandma into to the old people's home in order to be able to afford your car insurance. But he notices that there's a non-binary box. Well, he's now not going to tick female because that would be a lie. But non-binary, I mean, who's to say who's non-binary or not? So he clicks on the non-binary box, $800 less. $800 less on like a $2,000 policy. And then he tries the female one just to be out of interest. And the female one is the female car insurance policy more than the non-binary policy. So according to the car insurers, non-binary drivers are not only safer than men, they're safer than women. Now, we don't have an explanation for this because when the insurers were asked about it and asked whether or not it's discriminatory, they said, no, you can read our policy document. We're allowed to distinguish between different people's sexes and genders. And then another one of the insurers just said, well, it's a sensitive topic, so we're not going to talk publicly about it. One can assume, one can infer perhaps, that all of this is based on data and that there's just not a lot of data about non-binary drivers yet. And so the algorithm is just going, well, we'll just make up a guess, I guess. We've got data on female accidents, we've got data on male accidents, we've got nothing on non-binary. Which this raises the question of, if a man who just applies for insurance as a non-binary individual for the lower premium, would the insurer have any grounds on which to object to that when it came time to pay out a claim? Like, how much of your life has to be spent being overtly non-binary in order for that to be a truthful statement? Like, can they go through your public persona and say, well, actually, you referred to yourself as a he in this, in your Facebook profile or something? Can't you just say, well, I didn't want to out myself on Facebook, but internally, deep down, in terms of my psyche and my soul, I'm neither male nor female? It's hard to imagine how they could oppose that argument. You're asking me whether or not I identify as non-binary. One person was saying to me this is outrageous because obviously what makes male drivers more dangerous is the fact that they're biological males, and female drivers safer is the fact that they're biological females. I'm not sure that we know that yet. Like, it is possible that the kinds of people who genuinely go through this world identifying everywhere as non-binary might have different accident statistics than males if they're biologically male, or females if they're biologically female. They may be less aggressive than people who present as cisgender males. But I don't think that you can, and so that raises the question of, is it fair at all to be differentiating between people on the basis of sex? Like, isn't insurance just supposed to be a kind of a risk pool where it doesn't really matter? You're not going to, it comes back to almost the Stephen Miller Afghan argument. It's like the collective punishment of all males because there are a few idiotic young males. So, I mean, but if you're going to be playing that game, then I don't think it's necessarily intrinsically wrong to play it for non-binary people. The question becomes, how can you have a non-binary category when we've been told for the past 5 or 10 years that questions about such things are intrusive and there's no independent way of verifying what a person's gender is, because gender is just a feeling. It's a kind of a spiritual thing that you have inside your soul. That seems unworkable, surely, in the long run, for something like an insurance policy. These have to be independently verifiable facts. They can't be just something that you feel in your gut. Ollie on YouTube says, Josh, enjoying your views here whilst mowing my lawn in Geelong. It is education and exercise at its finest. Ollie, thank you for the comment. I can guarantee you, mowing your lawn is not exercise at its finest, and Josh versus the News is not education at its finest. You have low standards, and you need to up your game, young man. Anyway, been lovely to talking to you guys. Thanks for all of the comments. I haven't been able to get to all of them. Thanks for all of the questions. I haven't been able to get to all of them. We will start adding more of these next year where there'll be more interaction directly with you guys. But in the meantime, hope you've enjoyed this initial salvo of Josh versus the News. Stay tuned for regular Uncomfortable Conversations programming in your podcast feed. I'll see you next week.